Have you ever wondered if there's, a literal playbook for overthrowing governments? It sounds like something out of a spy movie, right? Well, the source material for this explainer claims that not only does a playbook like this exist, but it's been put to use over and over again.
So let's start with a number, 198. According to our source, that's how many different, nonviolent ways there are to bring about regime change. We're not talking about war or military invasions here. We're talking about a series of carefully planned actions that are designed to turn a country's own people against their government.
And the man behind this number, a political scientist named Gene Sharp. The source we're looking at presents his work as the actual playbook we're deconstructing today. It's a manual for nonviolent struggle that's been translated into more than 30 languages and has allegedly been the inspiration for operations all over the world, from Europe to Asia.
Okay, so to really get how this all works, the source breaks it down into two totally different strategies. You've got the traditional, old-school method, and then you have a much more modern, kind of sneaky approach.
And you can really see the difference here. On one side, you have what's called a top-down attack. Think of it like a hammer. It's fast, it's obvious, and it's usually aimed at dictatorships. But the other method, bottom-up subversion, is completely different. The source describes this one as a quiet, very patient game. It's all about shaping perception, and it's waged against democracies over years, not days.
All right, let's dig into that first one, the more traditional method, the direct, top-down attack that goes right after a government's leadership.
The source basically describes this as a blunt instrument. You go straight for the leader, either with military force or by destroying their reputation. A public story is created to justify it. You probably heard this before, like the claims about Saddam Hussein building chemical weapons in Iraq, or the intervention in Libya with Gaddafi. The goal, our source says, is often to swap out that leader for someone who is a little more friendly to foreign interests, especially when it comes to things like oil.
But what happens after the mission is supposedly accomplished? Well, while this method was often sold to the public as a way to bring freedom, the source argues it usually led to something very different. The Arab Spring, for instance, is presented here not as a new dawn for democracy, but as a period that created massive power vacuums, chaos, and unfortunately, the perfect conditions for extremist groups to rise.
So now let's pivot to that second, more subtle strategy. The source claims this is really the playbook for our modern world, an era of social media, of information flying everywhere, and of established democracies.
This is where the whole thing becomes a long game. Seriously, according to the source, this process can take 5, 10, maybe even 15 years. It starts quietly, by funding and supporting local activist groups and NGOs. Then, a specific narrative gets built up, just hammering away at issues like corruption or unemployment. And once those seeds of doubt are planted, the focus shifts to attacking the legitimacy of the state itself. That's what eventually leads to mass protests and, in the end, a change in who's in charge.
Now, here's what's so critical about this strategy. It doesn't go after the leader directly. It attacks the very things that give a government its authority. The source uses this really powerful metaphor. A government is like a table, and the legs of that table are its key institutions: the judiciary, the bureaucracy, the election commission, the economy. Instead of trying to flip the whole table over, you just break the legs, one by one, until the whole thing collapses on its own.
Okay, so that's the theory. But how does this look in the real world? Well, the source takes this whole framework and applies it to a series of events in India, presenting them as a case study of this bottom-up playbook in action.
According to the analysis in our source, the playbook started years before any major protests. It points to a well-known activist getting a big award that has ties to foreign funding, which helps create a legitimate-looking alternative leader. Then, out of nowhere, an anti-corruption movement gets enormous, non-stop media coverage. And what happens next? A brand new political party is born right out of that movement, perfectly set up to take advantage of the anti-government narrative it helped build.
And the source argues that this pattern didn't stop there. It frames more recent events like large-scale organized protests, the discovery of online toolkits for coordinating activists, a constant public questioning of the election commission's integrity, and damaging economic reports from foreign firms as all fitting perfectly into that bottom-up strategy of systematically chipping away at the state's institutions.
But this brings us to the biggest question of all. Why? Why would anyone do all this? What's the ultimate motivation behind such complicated, long-term operations? The final section of our source material really tries to get to the heart of the why.
The whole argument boils down to one simple geopolitical goal: maintaining a unipolar world. The source claims that the point of these operations is to disrupt or destabilize any rising nation that could potentially challenge the current global superpower. The goal is to make sure the world doesn't become multipolar. And if a rising power can't be stopped, well, its government is simply changed to one that won't be a threat.
To back this up, the source points to this very famous quote that's attributed to the former U.S. strategist Henry Kissinger. It's presented here as the philosophical foundation for this entire strategy. This idea that global control isn't about territory anymore, it's about controlling the key resources: energy, food, and money.
So all of this leaves us with a really tough question, especially in our interconnected world today. After going through the framework laid out in our source material, we have to ask, how do we tell the difference between a truly organic, grassroots movement and a carefully orchestrated geopolitical play? Where exactly do you draw that line?